Do you think she even understands a damn word we're saying? Grant West leaned back at the head of the oak table, glass of bourbon trembling in his hand as he smirked across the polished surface, voice dripping with contempt when he asked, "Do you think she even understands a damn word we're saying?" Miles Carter beside him laughed, low and sharp. Doubt it. An $800 million dinner for a silent CEO who doesn't speak up? That's practically free. They thought it a joke. They thought it harmless. But it wasn't. Because sitting across from them, poised like a statue in silk and silver, was Evelyn Moriyama, a woman who built a robotics empire from nothing. Her silence tonight was her shield, and in the shadows guiding wine pours and clearing plates was Monica Rivers, a waitress the size of quiet dignity, witnessing every sneer, every sideways compliment, every condescending nod. The men didn't know that Monica spoke Japanese fluently, or that she understood every insult. They didn't know that Evelyn Moriyama heard every mockery, even when translated, even when masked. They thought this dinner was theirs to dominate. But they were wrong. Because what they believed was control was about to shatter from the one person they never noticed, from the one voice they assumed would stay silent. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Emiko Sato sat at the center of the table, her eyes unreadable, her hands folded delicately as if she were simply a guest at her own dinner. To the men across from her, Grant West and Miles Carter, this silence looked like weakness. They leaned into it, trading jokes and muttered insults, convinced that the quiet woman opposite them could not follow their words, let alone challenge their power. What they didn't know was that Emiko Sato had already built a multinational empire in Japan, commanding thousands of employees and reshaping an entire industry. Tonight was not her test. Tonight was theirs. And across the room, unnoticed by the men who laughed too loudly and drank too quickly, stood Alana Johnson, the young waitress clearing plates and refilling glasses, her presence overlooked but her ears catching every word. They saw her as invisible. They couldn't have been more wrong. But the questions lingered in that rooftop restaurant, unspoken yet sharp as broken glass. Why did Emiko Sato choose silence in the face of open disrespect? What exactly lay hidden in the contract folder Grant guarded so carefully, a deal worth $800 million that he seemed desperate to push through before anyone could question it? And how could Alana Johnson, a woman whose name they would not even remember if asked, possibly alter the fate of billionaires with a single choice, a single sentence at the right moment? These were not questions the men asked themselves, because arrogance blinded them. Yet these were the very questions that would decide who walked away from that dinner in triumph and who walked away in ruin. The answers would not come easily. They would come only after betrayal revealed itself, after humiliation was forced upon the wrong people, and after a moment of truth that hinged not on wealth or power, but on language. Because when Alana Johnson finally opened her mouth, speaking words in a tongue Grant and Miles could never anticipate, the air in the room shifted. The weight of $800 million turned on its axis, and the balance of control passed from the hands of two arrogant men to two women they had underestimated. The answers would come but only after the night delivered a sentence in Japanese that neither Grant nor Miles would ever forget. Emiko Sato's story did not begin in a boardroom or at the head of a polished mahogany table. It began in the narrow back streets of Osaka, where she grew up an orphan after losing her parents in an accident when she was only 12. She had no wealth, no family name to protect her, only a second-hand computer and a restless mind. By 15, she was coding simple programs, and by 22, she had founded what would become Shinkai Robotics, a company that would revolutionize the delicate bridge between neurosurgery and artificial intelligence. Surgeons across Asia called her a pioneer. Investors in Tokyo called her unstoppable. Yet when she brought her vision to Silicon Valley, the whispers followed her like shadows. Too quiet, too foreign, too female to command respect in an industry that rewarded arrogance over humility. And now, across from Grant West and Miles Carter, those same whispers had become laughter. Grant West and Miles Carter had never known life on the margins. They rose not by struggle, but by strategy, sharp-suited predators in the biotech world. Their names appeared in glossy magazine covers, always paired with the same phrases: visionaries, disruptors, self-made giants. But beneath the headlines lay a history of ruthless tactics, of hostile takeovers that stripped companies bare, leaving only the shell of their own egos. To them, success was not invention but acquisition. They built little, but they consumed everything in their path. Their empire stretched across San Francisco, built on quick deals and quicker betrayals. When they heard of Shinkai Robotics, they saw not innovation, but prey. To them, Emiko Sato was a quiet foreigner with a prize they could buy and bury. They believed the dinner was theirs to control, the contract theirs to sign. What they did not see was that they were walking into the one battle arrogance could never win. Alana Johnson's journey could not have been more different. Born in Washington, D.C., the daughter of an American diplomat stationed in Japan, she spent her childhood moving between two cultures. In Tokyo, she sat through school lessons in a language most Americans never heard outside of textbooks, and by the time she returned to the United States, Japanese was as natural to her as English. But life back home offered no privilege. Her mother's assignments ended, her father had left years before, and Alana found herself juggling college classes by day and restaurant shifts by night. She carried trays to tables where no one looked her in the eye, served cocktails to men who spoke as if she were invisible, and returned home exhausted to books she barely had time to read. In every room she entered, she was underestimated, a young black woman dismissed before she ever opened her mouth. And yet it was that invisibility that gave her power, because no one ever imagined she was listening. What tied Emiko Sato and Alana Johnson together, though they had never met before that rooftop dinner, was the weight of being underestimated. Emiko fought daily against prejudice, navigating Silicon Valley where her brilliance was overshadowed by her accent, where investors looked past her to the men who echoed her ideas. Alana fought in a quieter way, in the shadows of service where no one cared to ask what languages she spoke, what dreams she held, or what sacrifices she carried just to survive. Both women knew what it meant to be dismissed, to be unseen, to be spoken over, and in that private dining room with Grant West and Miles Carter laughing at what they could not understand, those two battles would collide. What neither man realized was that the power they thought they controlled was about to slip into the hands of the very women they had tried so hard to ignore. The Palisade stood like a jewel above San Francisco, a rooftop sanctuary reserved for those who believed themselves untouchable. Chandeliers threw their light against marble floors, the glass walls opened to sweeping views of the bay, and every polished surface whispered luxury. Grant West had chosen it deliberately. For him, the setting was as much a weapon as the contract he carried. He wanted Emiko Sato to feel the weight of his city, his stage, his power. As the servers laid out courses flown in from across the globe, he raised his glass with the easy confidence of a man who believed he already owned the room. "To science without borders," he declared, voice booming, a toast rehearsed more for the headlines he imagined than for the woman across from him. Emiko lifted her glass in silence, her lips moving in a brief sentence of Japanese, translated softly by an aide. Her reply was short, measured, unshaken. Yet to Grant and Miles it felt like defiance, and they sharpened their smiles accordingly. What began as arrogance soon shifted into mockery. Miles Carter leaned close to his partner, his voice carrying across the table. "Is this business or a pantomime?" The men seated nearby chuckled, emboldened by the silence they mistook for ignorance. When Emiko's aide leaned in again to translate, Grant rolled his eyes theatrically, setting his glass down with a click. "Negotiating with a bonsai tree might be faster," he sneered, the insult dressed as humor, but cutting sharper than he realized. Around them the city lights glittered, indifferent to the humiliation unfolding at the table. Yet one pair of ears did not let the words pass unnoticed. Alana Johnson, balancing a tray of wine, absorbed every syllable, each insult lodging like a stone. She moved silently between tables, her uniform crisp, her steps careful, but her mind alert. They saw her only as a pair of hands. She was far more than that. Grant snapped his fingers sharply as Alana approached. "Sweetheart, more wine," he said, without glancing up, his command as casual as tossing scraps to a dog. She poured with steady precision, her face unreadable, but behind her eyes, she stored every detail. The flicker of Emiko's expression as her silence deepened, the gleam of satisfaction in Miles's smirk, the way Grant's fingers tapped the contract folder as if it were already signed. Every smirk, every whisper, every insult. Alana caught them all. She was invisible to them, but she was listening. And unlike them, she understood both languages weaving across the table, the surface conversation and the quiet despair beneath. As the night stretched on, the laughter grew louder, the words more reckless. Emiko sat still, her presence regal but isolated, as though she were both guest and ghost at her own negotiation. Her aide leaned close once more, but Emiko waved him back with a gentle motion, and then, almost too softly to hear, she whispered in Japanese, her voice fragile in its sadness. "Is there no one here who sees me?" Alana heard it. She heard every syllable, understood every ache wrapped inside those words. For a moment, tray in hand, she stood frozen in place, her heart pounding as if Emiko had spoken not to the air, but directly to her. It was not meant for the men at the table. It was not meant for the aide. It was meant for anyone with eyes to see past the arrogance, anyone with ears to hear the truth hidden inside the quiet. And in that instant, Alana knew she was no longer only a server. She was the witness to something that could not stay silent forever. For Alana Johnson, the storm had been building long before this night. Years of invisibility had shaped her into someone the world walked past without a second glance, and in those years, she had learned to hold her tongue. But as she listened to Grant West and Miles Carter laughing over Emiko Sato's silence, memories pressed into her like rising waves. She was back in Kyoto as a child, walking the narrow lanes with her mother, bowing to shopkeepers who treated her with respect, despite her foreign face, hearing the music of the Japanese language not as a curiosity, but as a second home. In Japan, she had been seen. Here, she was unseen. And now the two worlds collided, the respect she had grown up with against the arrogance of men who dismissed what they could not understand. That collision left her shaking, her hands tight on the tray, her silence stretched to its breaking point. Foster, her manager at the Palisade, had already noticed the tension in her stance. Sliding past her in the corner of the room, his whisper was sharp and warning. "Don't get involved, Alana. Just do your job." His words were not unkind. They were protective, shaped by years of watching wealthy clients devour staff who spoke out of turn. But Alana could no longer fold herself into obedience. She set the tray down, drew a breath, and stepped forward. With deliberate grace, she bent at the waist, bowing deeply in the tradition she had learned as a girl. When she lifted her head, the words that left her mouth were not in English, but in perfect Japanese, clear, respectful, and direct to Emiko Sato. The room froze. Forks stilled against plates. Glasses hovered midair. Miles Carter's mouth parted, stunned. Grant West scoffed, muttering, "What the hell is this?" The aide blinked, his role suddenly made irrelevant. And across the table, for the first time all night, Emiko's eyes lit up. What came next was not hesitation, but courage. Alana Johnson, the waitress they had ignored, reached for the contract folder Grant had been guarding. He laughed bitterly, assuming she could not know what she was looking at. But as she flipped through the crisp pages, her eyes locked on the text designed to deceive. Section 7B, buried in fine print, transferred ownership of Shinkai Robotics patents without acknowledgement, stripping Emiko not only of her company, but of the inventions she had poured her life into. Section 12 went further, a clause written to bar her from returning to the industry under her own name, ensuring her silence would extend beyond tonight into permanent exile. Alana's voice did not tremble as she read the words aloud in English, her pronunciation crisp, her tone unflinching. The billionaires weren't just buying her company, they were burying her legacy. And for the first time that night, someone had dragged the truth into the open. Emiko Sato, silent and unreadable until this moment, lifted her gaze to meet Alana's. In that look passed something no contract could control: recognition, gratitude, and an unspoken alliance. Grant's smirk faltered, Miles shifted uneasily, and even Foster, who had warned her moments before, stared at Alana with a new kind of awe. The room that had belonged to the arrogant now belonged to the underestimated. And though the night was far from over, the balance had shifted forever. Emiko Sato's stillness had always been her shield, but now it became her weapon. She lifted one hand lightly, a gesture that silenced even her aide. From a slim silver case, he drew a small device, placing it gently on the polished table. At first, the men scoffed. Grant West leaned back with exaggerated bravado, rolling his eyes as if nothing could touch him. But when Emiko pressed a button, the air shifted. From the device came their own voices, sharp and undeniable. Grant's words filled the room. "Cut the clauses, she'll never know." Then Miles Carter's chuckle followed, dripping with arrogance. "She's lost in her own little world. Translator does the heavy lifting." The laughter that had once belonged to them now hung in the air like a noose. What they thought was clever had become confession, and what they thought was private had become public. They thought silence was weakness. They thought ignorance was protection. But every word was recorded, and every word was damning. The men stiffened, color draining from their faces as their own schemes betrayed them. Grant was first to recover, slamming a hand against the table and forcing bravado into his tone. "That's illegal. You can't record a private meeting without disclosure. This won't hold up in any court." His voice shook under the weight of his own panic, the calm confidence he carried like armor now splintering in front of everyone. Alana Johnson stood her ground, her tray abandoned, her eyes locked on him. And when she spoke, her voice carried with it not just the truth of the moment, but the fury of every insult endured. "So is fraud," she answered, her words sharp as glass. The room, once ruled by arrogance, now answered to her. Miles Carter opened his mouth to recover, to spin, to claw back control, but nothing came. His face twitched with desperation, his mind searching for a way out that no longer existed. Every path was blocked, every excuse undone by their own laughter replaying from the device in crisp clarity. Emiko Sato did not need to raise her voice, nor did she need to lean forward. She simply remained calm, fortress-like, her presence commanding without effort. In her silence there was no weakness, only power, and with Alana Johnson at her side, the fortress was impenetrable. The confidence of Grant and Miles collapsed not with shouts but with the steady, unshakable truth laid bare in the open. Checkmate had come, not with lawyers or contracts, but with the voices of men who believed they could not be heard. The moment of collapse was interrupted not by silence but by anger. Foster, the manager of the Palisade, stormed into the private dining room, his face flushed and his voice booming. He didn't care about billionaires, contracts, or recordings, only about the spectacle unraveling in his most prestigious dining hall. He pointed a trembling finger at Alana Johnson. "You're done here. Fired. Get out. Now." His words cracked through the air like a whip, stripping her of dignity in front of the very people who had mocked her minutes before. Security staff appeared at the door, ready to escort her away like a criminal. For Alana, it was the story she knew too well: stand up, speak truth, and pay the price. Her tray still sat abandoned on the marble floor, a symbol of how quickly the world decided who belonged and who did not. But just as she took her first steps toward the exit, the doors swung wide again, not to let her out, but to let others in. A half-dozen attorneys in dark suits, their briefcases heavy with documents, strode into the room. And behind them came the flash of cameras, the unmistakable whirl of media crews. This wasn't chaos. This was choreography. Emiko Sato had planned it. Every insult, every whisper, every clause hidden in the contract had been leading to this moment. Grant and Miles froze, their smugness evaporating as reporters shouted questions and cameras captured their paling faces. Within hours, headlines would spread like wildfire. Tech titans caught mocking female CEO on tape. Waitress exposes $800 million fraud deal. What was meant to be a quiet dinner now exploded into an international scandal. Grant tried to rise, tried to push past the cameras, but the microphones followed him, chasing him with questions he had no answers for. Miles attempted to snatch the recording device, but Emiko's legal team blocked him, their presence unyielding. Alana Johnson stood at the threshold, caught between humiliation and vindication, between losing everything and gaining more than she ever thought possible. She braced herself to be cast aside, another casualty in the war of power and money. But then Emiko rose for the first time that night, her presence commanding the room more than the chandeliers, more than the cameras, more than the men who had mocked her. She crossed the floor with deliberate grace, stopping in front of Alana. And in perfect English, she spoke words that silenced everyone. "You will not leave. You will come with me." The world thought Alana was disposable and nameless waitress, a shadow in the background of wealth and power. But Emiko saw what no one else did. She did not hire Alana as a server, nor as a translator. She hired her as cultural liaison for Shinkai Robotics' US launch, a role that would place her at the center of a revolution in technology and respect. Foster's jaw fell open, the security guards froze, and the cameras captured the moment a waitress became something more. Alana had walked into the palisade invisible, erased by arrogance and prejudice. She walked out, not only seen, but unstoppable. This wasn't just a story about contracts or corporations. It wasn't just about a deal scribbled in legal language or about two executives who believed they could outwit anyone who stood in their way. This was about silence, how it can be turned into a weapon, how it can strip dignity, and how it can suffocate truth. But it was also about how silence can be broken. Emiko Sato chose her silence as armor, knowing every word was being recorded, knowing every moment was building toward revelation. Alana Johnson chose to break her silence to speak truth aloud when it mattered most. And together, in that glittering rooftop restaurant where arrogance thought itself untouchable, they turned cruelty into consequence and arrogance into ashes. The underestimated had spoken, and the world had no choice but to listen. So now the question comes to you. What would you have done in that room? Would you have stayed quiet, hoping not to be noticed? Or would you have risked everything like Alana to speak the truth in front of those who believed they held all the power? We want to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below. And before we wrap up, don't forget, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And most importantly, hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because next week, we're uncovering another shocking story of power, betrayal, and the moment the underestimated fought back.